Hi, I'm Kristen Goodwin. On this episode of the Fox News Rundown, General Mark Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, facing calls from some Republicans to resign over allegations he reached out to China, fearing a war in the final days of the Trump administration. Fox News Senior Strategic Analyst and retired four-star General Jack Keane speaks out in defense of the nation's top military officer, joining the rundown to detail why. A Quinnipiac University poll suggests President Biden's overall approval rating has slipped to 42% following the U.S. withdrawing from Afghanistan. Fox News Sunday host Chris Wallace weighs in on the poll and what it could mean for the president's economic agenda. Plus commentary by Jimmy Fela, host of Fox Across America. The Fox News Rundown is a daily news podcast where we take a deeper look at the stories important to you. You can subscribe on your favorite podcast player by going to foxnewspodcast.com.
I'm Dana Perino.
I'm Juan Williams.
I'm Kennedy, and this is the Fox News Rundown.
Friday, September 17th, 2021. I'm Lisa Brady. Phone calls are making waves again in Washington, only this time it's the Joint Chiefs Chairman and China, thanks to a new book.
These calls that the chairman makes and policy people make with their counterparts are done to keep them informed, and particularly with adversaries, so they don't misinterpret something that could lead to something that could be very dangerous.
I'm Chris Foster. President Biden's low approval rating could hurt his chances of getting big things done.
Now, if Biden were at 70% in the polls, pushing the Biden agenda would seem like a better calculation. When he's at 43%, not so much.
We speak with Fox News Sunday host Chris Wallace.
And I'm Jimmy Fela. I've got the final word on the Fox News Rundown.
Two phone calls with China in the waning months of the Trump administration are suddenly getting a lot of attention after published excerpts from an upcoming book made it sound like the Joint Chiefs Chairman offered to give his Chinese counterpart a heads up if then President Trump was preparing to attack. Sources tell Fox News that's not true, and General Mark Milley, through a spokesman, has issued a written statement defending the calls as appropriate reassurance to maintain strategic stability. Both President Biden and U.S. Defense Chief Lloyd Austin offering public support for Milley.
I have great confidence in General Milley.
I have confidence in General Milley.
But that hasn't stopped calls for Milley's resignation. Some Republican lawmakers and former President Trump saying, as described in the book, it might be treason.
In talking to people in the Pentagon, I think I have a grasp on what took place, and it's not only is it not treasonous, it's something that they should have done. And there's so much misinformation out there. It is absolutely stunning.
General Jack Keane is a retired four-star general, the chairman of the Institute for the Study of War, and Fox News senior strategic analyst.
This was all initiated by the Secretary of Defense, Mark Esper. He saw intelligence that meant, these are my words, that the Chinese were getting spun up and concerned that they could possibly have an incident or an unwarranted confrontation with the United States, because the United States appears to be getting more aggressive in their rhetoric and also in the deployment of their forces. So when Secretary of Defense Esper saw this, he called in his undersecretary, who's in charge of policy for the Department of Defense, and he says, listen, why don't you send a back channel to the Chinese? And in so many words, these are my words, he's saying, calm the waters with these guys, all right? And they got a favorable response back. And then about a week or so later, General Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, wanted to contact his counterpart, who they refer to as the Chief of Defense, but he's a military general, who he has spoken to. Usually he tries to speak to him once every 3 or 4 months, so he's spoken to him many times. That he wanted to make certain that he understood, that the military understood, not just the policy people in China understood, that there's no reason to be alarmed here.
So General Keane's sources are offering the same take as the White House, the Pentagon, and Milley himself, that the calls were not secret, instead going through the proper channels with multiple agencies preparing for and monitoring them.
I think it may have been a video conference, but there was 15 people in the room, all monitoring what Milley is saying and what the Chinese are saying through an interpreter. And then they prepared a memorandum of that call. They don't do transcripts. They don't record the call. And they did a memorandum of it and shared that with the interagency so that their principal leaders, who were not in the room, would read what took place on the call and what the feedback was from the Chinese. That is the system working about as good, in my mind, as it could possibly be, because these calls that the chairman makes and policy people make with their counterparts are done to keep them informed, and particularly with adversaries, so they don't misinterpret something that could lead to something that could be very dangerous. As to the second call, this is grossly misreported in the media. We didn't make the call. The Chinese called us on 8 January. They called us because of what took place at the Capitol on 6 January. I think the initial conversation was also with the policy person who worked for the acting Secretary of Defense, Miller. And then Milley also got a call, and he went through the same process once again to prepare for that call that he did with the previous call, and then shared that memorandum with others, and also had a discussion, I believe it was with Secretary Pompeo and also the National Security Advisor. And I believe that is a reflection of the system working, quite the contrary to what is being said out there. And I'm a little stunned by the fact that after all of the sensational reporting that was done against the Trump administration for 4 years, and how so much of that proved not to be true, and now we have sensational reporting again here that so many of the people that were opposed to that sensational reporting against President Trump now are accepting it on face value, which makes no sense to me whatsoever.
The Biden administration continues to face questions from both sides of the aisle about the chaotic exit from Afghanistan and about the president's insistence that he followed a military consensus about the withdrawal methods, including giving up Bagram Air Base. White House spokeswoman Jen Psaki on Wednesday pointing back to the Trump administration's deal with the Taliban and defending the current commander-in-chief.
He was provided a range of advice. I'm not going to get into more details than that, but what's important to note at this point is it's crystal clear that 2,500 troops would not have been sustainable on the ground. It would have been either increase troops on the ground or withdraw troops on the ground.
The president has said none of his military advisors recommended keeping 2,500 troops on the ground for stability. But sources are telling Fox News that former commander of U.S. forces in Afghanistan, Army General Austin Scott Miller, has told lawmakers he did recommend that, while warning that a Taliban takeover could happen much more quickly than expected.
What General Miller, in full disclosure, I know him very well. I've talked to him many, many times over the past number of years that he served with him, and I've been in contact with him since he left Afghanistan. The testimony that he provided to the Senate Armed Services Committee is something that I know for a fact, is that he recommended, along with General McKenzie, the Central Command Commander, along with General Milley, Chairman of Joint Chiefs, and the Secretary of Defense, that we should not withdraw our forces from Afghanistan because it will invite and incentivize the Taliban takeover. You can argue about what the time frame is here, but nonetheless, the Taliban will take over, and American security will be threatened once again. So, yeah, the President Biden had all of that information, even though we've seen him publicly say, well, no one was pushing back on the numbers of military we should, on withdrawing the military from there. And then another statement he made, well, it was sort of split. It wasn't split in the military channels, and it wasn't split in the intelligence channels.
Critics of the way Afghanistan ended have also warned that it could hurt U.S. credibility, trust with our allies, and embolden our adversaries. Do you think that's some of what's happening with North Korea's recent missile launches, for instance?
Oh, unquestionably. North Korea sees an opportunity here to put pressure on Biden to get concessions. Sanction relief is what they're seeking. Economic assistance is the means. Increased intimidation from the Chinese over Taiwan, and it'll result in the same with our allies. we've already seen the Iranians. Listen, can you imagine how the Iranians feel? We've given up 7 military bases and multiple CIA bases on Iran's eastern border, which is Afghanistan. Same thing with China. We're on their border. Afghanistan is on their border as well. And now the Iranians want to focus on getting the United States out of Iraq. And what have they done? Well, they've already conducted a drone attack at Erbil. Since this with the debacle involving this withdrawal, I can tell you from a source, American source, journalist, Pulitzer Prize winner, who just got back from Ukraine, told me that the Ukrainians, she was at a conference there, and the Ukrainians are literally up in arms over this thing in terms of their concern about the United States, because they're dealing with Russia, and they believe Russia absolutely is going to put more pressure on them. And so, yes, our allies have real concerns. And remember, I mean, we have been so critical of the Europeans at times, not standing up to support the United States. And the United States is always doing all the heavy lifting around the world. And the Europeans wanted to stay in Afghanistan. And their contribution was 7,000 to 8,000. The United States contribution was 2,500. They wanted to keep that 7,000 or 8,000 there. Why? Even though they went there because the United States was attacked, they wanted to protect their own national security. They knew full well that if an Al-Qaeda epicenter formed again, or an ISIS epicenter was able to form in Afghanistan, that they would be attacked as well as the United States.
On Wednesday, President Biden announced a new trilateral security pact with the UK and Australia, known as AUKUS for short, calling it part of an effort to update alliances.
This initiative is about making sure that each of us has a modern capability, the most modern capabilities we need to maneuver and defend against rapidly evolving threats.
Especially the threat from China, which swiftly criticized what it called Cold War mentality. The goal of the pact is better sharing of defense capabilities, including nuclear-powered submarines for Australia.
I absolutely endorse that. And yes, that is a very good thing, and we have to do more things like that. What we're trying to do here with China, we know China is going to exist. We know they're, at least for the near future, they will continue to have a robust economy, although I think they're going to face some eventual headwinds. And we know we have to deter their aggression and their ambition to dominate the region and the world writ large. We don't want a military conflict, but we do have to invest in deterrence. And your question is an example of the investment in that deterrence by giving Australia enhanced military capabilities. So when China looks at, well, it's time finally to take charge and take charge of Taiwan and bring them finally into the family, whether they like it or not, and use military force. When they thinking about that decision, we always want them to come to the conclusion that doing something like that will impose far too much cost and risk on us in doing it, and will take us away from our overall ambition in terms of the kind of status we want to achieve in the world. Because a confrontation with the United States and our allies will take President Xi and his regime off any of the strategic ambitions that they're trying to achieve. It'll be a major setback for them.
Retired four-star General Jack Keane, chairman of the Institute for the Study of War and Fox News Senior Strategic Analyst. We are always thankful for your time.
Yeah, great talking to you, Lisa. Thank you so much.
This is Jimmy Fallon with your Fox News commentary coming up.
Looking at the last 14 presidents, the one with the highest approval rating at this point, mid-September of year one, was George W. Bush, about 82% approval. He got a bump from the patriotism and unity after the 9/11 attacks.
I can hear you, the rest of the world hears you, and the people who knocked these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
The statistics website 538.com has President Kennedy's approval rating second highest at this point, followed by Truman, Eisenhower, and Johnson. At the bottom of the list,
my administration has brought profound change to Washington.
Donald Trump at about 39%. Tied for 13th place out of the 14, Gerald Ford and Joe Biden. He's got an average 46% approval rating right now, lower in some polls and slipping since he took office. That could get in the way of his economic agenda.
A lot of Democrats are going to have to make some very tough choices in the next month.
Chris Wallace is the host of Fox News Sunday.
You've got the infrastructure bill. You've got this huge $3.5 trillion tax and spending bill, raising the debt limit. There are a lot of Democrats who are going to have to take risky political positions to try to push the Biden agenda. Now, if Biden were at 70% in the polls, pushing the Biden agenda would seem like a better calculation. When he's at 43%, not so much. So it does have an impact, and as you get closer to the midterms, it has even more of an impact as to how, whether you want to follow your leader or whether you want to put some distance.
Yeah. To that end, the spending bills, President Biden sat down with Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema, these two moderates who are sort of getting in the progressives' way. They don't want to spend that much money. He basically said, look, what do you want? And what do they want?
Well, we don't know. They didn't say. We know, excuse me, in the case of Manchin, because he did an op-ed piece the other day, he wants a lot less money. I mean, he's talking, it sounds so funny, as I was about to say this is a lot less money, because it's a humongous amount of money.
He wants $1 trillion.
$1 to $1.5 trillion, but, which is huge money even in Washington, but it's a lot less. It's half, or even less than half, of $3.5 trillion. My guess is that Democrats, I don't know. I guess at this point I still think that they will pass a big tax and spending bill, because if they don't, with control of the House and the Senate as tenuous as it is, and a Democratic president, I think it's disastrous for them. I mean, if you put them in charge and they don't come through, I just think it craters your chances in the midterms. But do I think it's going to be $3.5 trillion? Absolutely not. It'll be, I think it'll be south of $2 trillion.
Yeah, it looks like they're clearly they want to get something done. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi says they're going to do what they call pre-conferencing on the bigger bill. They're going to work with Senate leadership to make sure that whatever she gets passed can also get through the Senate. They want to try to have it almost pre-approved.
Yeah, well, I mean, the point is, and this has happened in the past when you've got a Democratic House and a Democratic Senate, is the House is more liberal, and sometimes they will pass bigger packages with more liberal things, which puts moderates in a spot. Now, they might be willing to be in the spot if it then becomes law, but to have it then taken out by the more moderate Senate really is you have a vote you don't want to defend, and you don't even get the benefit of the bill that you can go back to your constituents and say, well, I gave you this. So that's something they don't want to do. So pre-conferencing is basically saying, let's work out what can pass both houses so we don't pass a bunch of stuff in the House that you're going to take out in the Senate anyway.
President Biden says that he has complete confidence in his Joint Chiefs Chairman, General Mark Milley. The story came out in this new Bob Woodward book that Milley called his Chinese counterpart late in the Trump presidency to issue some reassurances that there wasn't going to be a military attack. There are some Republicans saying, look, he should resign. Milley said, look, I didn't do anything wrong or even out of the ordinary here. What's your take on it?
I have to say, I don't understand why this is such a big deal. If we had any intention of attacking China, then what Milley did, which was basically to say, hey, we're not going to attack you, and I'll let you know, would be outrageous. It would be treasonous, and, he should be fired and brought up on charges. But we had no intention of attacking China. There was no reason to attack China. The only reason that he called was reportedly, because they were getting intel at the Pentagon that China was worried by the instability in the Trump administration and worried that President Trump might launch an attack against China to try to deflect and maybe find some way to stay in power. Obviously, that wasn't true. But if the Chinese believed it, that's dangerous, because then there's the possibility they're going to take some action to preempt the action they're worried you're going to take.
People at the Pentagon are telling us, our colleague Jennifer Griffin at the Pentagon, that, look, the calls were made, but it was no secret. And the book is mischaracterizing this as saying Milley was concerned that Trump was unstable and might attack, when in fact it was the Chinese that were worried, not Milley.
Right. exactly. Although having said that, I think there is some indication, because of another part of the Woodward Costa book, that Milley was concerned about Trump being unstable, and that's when he kind of didn't insert himself into the nuclear launch procedure, but basically talked to the people who are part of it, because it goes from the president to the Secretary of Defense to other people. It doesn't go through with the chain of command through the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, just to say, hey, look, let's keep our procedures in place. Remember, this is in January 6th, and the immediate aftermath. We had just had the attack on the Capitol. There were people who believed, and I think Milley was one of them, that Trump had played a role in that insurrection. I will say this one thing critical of Milley. I haven't read the Woodward book yet, but I have read several of the other books about the final days, and there's a lot of quoting of Milley. Not that he talked to the reporters, but he talked to somebody who talked to the reporters, and how outraged he was by the clearing of what Lafayette Square and the photo op in front of St. John's Church back in the summer of 2020, and a number of things. And I think that for a chairman of the Joint Chiefs to get that out there in terms of political comments is a mistake.
We've got this rally, Justice for J6, they're calling it January 6th. You talked about the riot at the Capitol. Capitol Police want to be ready for anything that may happen. Are you hearing this is going to be a well-attended thing, a big deal? Is there a lot of concern in the Capitol?
Well, there's enough concern that they put those fences up, the 7-foot fences up around the entire Capitol again. Generally speaking, because it's been so promoted in advance, people think that it isn't going to go off the tracks and become a violent exercise. And thankfully, the House and Senate will be out, so it's not like our lawmakers will be in any danger. But, the January 6th happened, and so obviously there is concern about this. To be honest, I'm not going downtown. Why would you want to? There is the possibility. I mean, there was a story, I guess it was Monday, that somebody was arrested. And remember, it only takes a few people to do something crazy, or one person, that somebody was arrested, parked in a pickup truck outside the DNC headquarters with some knives and bayonets and machetes in his cab of his truck, and saying that he was on patrol. So, there's always concern when you got something like this.
Yeah, I guess if you live in D.C. proper, it might not be a bad day to kind of lay low. Chris, one more. The California recall amounted to, almost $300 million worth of nothing. Gavin Newsom is still governor today. Now, he hammered this whole process as Trumpism.
We may have defeated Trump, but Trumpism is not dead in this country. The big lie, the January 6th insurrection, all the voting suppression efforts that are happening all across this country.
Is that the Democratic playbook at the moment?
Well, it particularly works in a state like California, where Democrats out-register Republicans 2-1. In a state that's more evenly split, playing the Trump card might not be as effective. The fact is, there are legitimate reasons beyond Donald Trump to have questions about Gavin Newsom. There's obviously the managing of the forest fires, not to say it's his fault, the way that COVID and COVID mitigation has been managed. You've got, this just terrible homeless problem, a real epidemic in some of the major cities, particularly Los Angeles. There are reasons to not be crazy about Gavin Newsom. I got to say, and I know it's a tradition in the West, our politics is polarizing enough. I'm not sure how I feel about the recall situation. I haven't thought about it a lot, and I haven't studied it in depth. But we give people 4 years to be in office. If they then have to look after 2 years or 3 years, there's something to be said for stable terms people have. And as you say, it ended up being, $30 million worth of nothing. So,
$300 million.
I'm not sure. Or $300 million, I'm sorry. Yeah, I add a zero. I just wonder whether or not this is really what we need in our country.
Well, since you brought it up, I have thought a bit about the California recall. I've never lived there, but the whole process to me seems kind of janky. Now, in effect, if 50% of the people vote for the recall, Newsom's out. And then you split up all the other people, so somebody with 20% support can end up being governor to Gavin Newsom's 49% of support. If you're going to do it. Put everybody on the ballot, including Newsom.
Well, I guess the question, that's an absolutely legitimate criticism and fair criticism. I'm just not sure that we need more politics in politics. I feel like there's too much politics in politics. And, you elect somebody, give them 4 years. I mean, can you imagine if we had a recall for president? And right now Joe Biden's at, 43% in support? I guess he might be recalled. It's I don't know. I
think you're right.
I cover politics for a living, but sometimes I think, wow, we got too much going on here.
Yeah, that would be too much of a, I don't know if it's a good thing for you to cover. The book's doing great. I looked it up. You're number 2 on Amazon, number 2 on New York Times, Countdown Bin Laden. So congratulations. Going to be happy with that.
Thank you. Yes. Although, there's a number ahead of number 2, which is number 1.
There is.
And so I would encourage all our listeners. Let me just say, I don't know if I should even be saying this or not, but I got an email from Bill McRaven, who is the architect of the whole raid, the commander of Joint Special Operations Command, and he said to me that this was the definitive book on the Bin Laden raid. So I am just thrilled at that, and that's better than any listing on any book list. But having that from Bill McRaven and being number 1 would be pretty cool too. It's a history thriller. I promise you. You start reading this book, you won't be able to put it down.
Author, nearly best-selling author. I think you have been in the past, though. Chris Wallace, also host of Fox News Sunday. Of course, Chris, thanks a lot.
Thank you, Chris.
Jason in the House, the Jason Chaffetz podcast. Dive deeper than the headlines and the party lines as I take on American life, politics, and entertainment. Subscribe now on foxnewspodcast.com or wherever you download podcasts.
Subscribe to this podcast at foxnewspodcasts.com.
And now, some good news with Tonya J. Powers.
Lawrence Brooks recently had quite a unique birthday party. It included a parade of Jeeps, a performance by the Victory Bells, entertainment from New Orleans musicians, and even greetings from Louisiana Governor John Bel Edwards. Lawrence was marking his 112th birthday and is the oldest living World War II veteran in the U.S. The event was a drive-by event due to the pandemic, hosted by the National World War II Museum, which is located in New Orleans. Lawrence was born in Norwood, Louisiana in 1909 and has lived in New Orleans since 1929. Drafted in 1940, he was a private in the Army's mostly black 91st Engineer Battalion, a unit that was stationed in New Guinea and the Philippines and built infrastructure such as bridges, roads, and airstrips. After an honorable discharge, he returned home in 1945 and went on to have 5 children and 5 stepchildren, 13 grandchildren, and 22 great-grandchildren. Thank you for your service, sir, and happy birthday. Tonya J. Powers, Fox News.
It's time for your Fox News commentary.
Jimmy Fallon.
What's on your mind?
I'm Jimmy Fallon. So Time magazine named Prince Harry and Meghan Markle to its list of most influential people. This is actually a good choice because every time I see them on TV, it influences me to change the channel. People are criticizing Time because the cover photo appears to be heavily airbrushed, but I'm not going to knock them for the touch-up paint because Lord knows I'm not winning any beauty contests anytime soon. What really bothers me is how publications like Time always airbrush Harry and Meghan's contributions to society, as if they're making any difference whatsoever, when in truth, they're nothing more than whiny, entitled, woe is me, spoiled brats. Harry likes to lecture everyone about climate change, but the guy's constantly flying around the world in a private jet. This is like telling someone they're in a no smoking section as you light up a cigar. As for Meghan, when she's not busy doing interviews with Oprah about how she's oppressed and she just wants her privacy, she's cashing a $25 million check from Spotify to do a podcast, and oh yeah, she's getting paid tens of millions to broadcast her life on Netflix too. I honestly don't even know who else made the top 100, but if I were them, I wouldn't get too excited because whoever was in charge of the rankings clearly screwed up royally. I'm Jimmy Fallon.
You've been listening to the Fox News Rundown. Stay up to date by subscribing to this podcast at foxnewspodcasts.com. And for up-to-the-minute news, go to foxnews.com. from the Fox News Podcasts Network. Subscribe and listen to the Trey Gowdy Podcast. Former federal prosecutor and 4-term U.S. Congressman from South Carolina brings you a one-of-a-kind podcast. Subscribe and listen now by going to foxnewspodcasts.com.
Love Fox News? Click the subscribe button to get more of the news and opinion you trust. And click the Fox News Rundown playlist for the latest episodes.